I never thought it would happen to me. I always heard stories of kids being left home alone and something horrible happening, but I never thought I'd be one of them. I was 13 years old, and my parents had gone out of town to visit family. It was summer, so I didn't have school either. I had a brother, but he was away at a friend's cottage at the time. My parents left me in charge of the house, and I was thrilled. Finally, I had some freedom. However, freedom came with responsibility, and I soon realized that being home alone was not as fun as I thought it would be. The first night was uneventful. I spent most of it watching TV and eating junk food. But in the morning, I noticed that all the patio furniture in the backyard was thrown into our pool. I was shocked. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, and I didn't know who could have done it. It wasn't terrifying or anything. I figured it was just neighborhood kids goofing around, but I didn't know why they targeted us. I pulled everything out of the pool and brushed off the incident. The next day was more of the same, video games and TV. Then I got bored and started snooping around the house. I went into my brother's room. My brother was 2 years older than me, and he was always getting into trouble. I poked around in his closet, curious to find what he was hiding. Maybe cigarettes or something. In the bottom drawer of his dresser, there was a false bottom with a hidden compartment. In it, I found a gun and a large sum of money. I was shocked and I stumbled back. Then I looked around some more, and I found drugs hidden there as well. I had no idea that my brother was involved in drugs, and I didn't know what to do. Then I remembered the incident with the patio furniture from the other day. What seemed like a harmless prank started to look like an ominous threat. If my brother had a gun, then he must have thought there was some reason that he might need it. I started to feel very alone and vulnerable. I sat in my brother's room for a while, contemplating my options. I could keep quiet and pretend that I never saw anything, or I could tell my parents. I knew my parents would be angry with my brother, and I didn't want to get him in trouble. However, after much deliberation, I knew that telling my parents was the right thing to do. I couldn't let my brother continue down this dangerous path. I called my mom and told her everything. I could hear the disappointment in her voice. She told me to stay in the house and not to open the door for anyone. They were going to come home early and deal with my brother. I spent the next few hours sitting in my room, waiting for my parents to come home. I was anxious and scared, but I knew I had done the right thing. When my parents finally arrived, they were furious. They called my brother and yelled at him over the phone. Then they searched his room. They found the gun, the money, and drugs. My parents had no choice but to get the police involved. Since he was under 18, he was considered a minor and avoided having a permanent criminal record. My brother was really mad at me, and he didn't talk to me for a long time. When he did, he was cold and distant. I felt guilty for getting him in trouble, but I knew I had done the right thing. He put me and the whole family in great danger because of what he did. I'm glad I told my parents. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. It's not always easy to do the right thing, but it is necessary. In the end, my brother was able to turn his life around. He spent a few months in a rehabilitation center and came back a changed person. He's no longer involved in drugs, and he's more focused on his studies. We were able to repair our relationship and became closer because of it. I believe he even understands why I did what I did. This happened almost 10 years ago. It was a weekend in September when my parents decided to attend a friend's dinner party, leaving me home alone in our apartment. We lived in the city, right in the downtown core. So since I was only 13 at the time, I was not supposed to go out alone, especially at night. It wasn't a big deal for me to be home alone at the time, since it was just for an evening. I stayed up doing homework and practicing piano, but at around 10 p.m., the fire alarm went off. That happened now and then in my building, but it was always a false alarm, really more of an annoyance than anything else. Sometimes you can wait it out, and the alarm will just stop, but as the sound grew louder, I knew I had to take it seriously. I quickly got dressed and headed for the door. As I opened the door, I was met with a strange sight. The hallway was completely empty and still. I figured that most of my neighbors must have left already, so I was the last one. There was no smell of smoke, but the flashing red lights and fire alarm continued to pulse, and I knew I had to leave the building. I started down the narrow staircase, the fluorescent emergency lights casting an eerie glow over everything. I made it down to the ground floor, relieved to see that there was no visible sign of smoke or fire. But as I stepped outside, I was met with a chaotic scene. There were people everywhere, crowding the street and talking to each other. Fire trucks were pulling up to the building, their sirens blaring. I felt a little uncomfortable out there without my parents. There were many people around, but I didn't know many of them. It was a large building, and I was not the most social person. I tried to find a spot to stand, away from the chaos, but I didn't want to get too far away from the group. I was feeling very vulnerable. That's when I noticed a strange man standing near me. He was older, with a scraggly beard and shabby clothes. He was watching me intently. I tried to ignore him, but he came closer, his breath smelling of stale cigarettes. He started talking to me, his voice low and insinuating. I didn't like the way he looked at me, and I tried to edge away, but he stepped closer and reached out to touch my arm. That's when Mr. Allen, one of my neighbors, appeared out of nowhere. He was a tall, burly man with a friendly face, and he lived on the 3rd floor. Mr. Allen was one of the only people in the building that we knew. He saw what was happening and stepped in front of me, shielding me from the strange man's grasp. Mr. Allen told the man to back off, and he finally slunk away into the crowd. He stayed with me, reassuring me that everything would be okay. He explained that the fire was probably a false alarm, and that we'd be back in the building in no time. But I was still scared and shaken. I didn't know how I was going to make it through the night. As the minutes ticked by, the situation began to calm down. The firefighters finally cleared the building, and surprise, surprise, there was no fire. My parents came home, and I was relieved to see them. I realized how lucky I was to have Mr. Allen there to help me. He was like a guardian angel, watching over me and keeping me safe. I never realized before how important it is to have good neighbors and a sense of community, especially in an urban setting. I still think about that strange man who tried to lure me away from the group, and I never saw that man again, so I'm pretty sure he didn't live in the building. He must have just been some creep who saw an opportunity and went for it. It was a sobering reminder that there are dangerous people out there, and that we need to be careful. This happened a long time ago. I was still in primary school, and I'm pretty sure I was around 12. It was summer vacation, and I was home with my older brother. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving us alone. We were excited to have the house to ourselves, and feel a sense of freedom that kids my age don't often experience. My brother, who was a few years older than me, was a little too cool to spend this time with his dorky younger sister. He made plans to meet up with his friends at the park, even though he was supposed to stay with me. I was a little disappointed he was leaving, but I understood that he wanted to spend time with his friends. After he left, I settled down on the couch and watched some TV. The hours flew by. Before I knew it, it was getting dark outside. I got up and went to the bathroom. As I was walking down the hall, I heard a loud noise coming from the living room. It sounded like the door had been opened. I thought my brother had come back early, so I walked over to see him. When I turned the corner to the living room, I almost fainted. It wasn't my brother at all. It was one of my brother's friends, Jim, who I knew was a real creep. I had problems with him before, and the other girls in the neighborhood had complained about him as well. My heart was racing as I tried to stay calm and think of what to do. I quickly locked myself in the bathroom. While I was in there, I could hear someone moving around in the house. I heard someone walking down the hallway, and then I heard a knock on the bathroom door. My body was paralyzed with fear as I heard a person say,
"Hey, it's me, Jim. I just wanted to talk to you. Come on, we can hang out."
I knew this guy was bad news. He was always getting into trouble and had a reputation for being creepy. My brother had warned me to stay away from him, but I never expected him to break into our house. I was so scared that I couldn't even respond. I stayed silent and prayed he would go away, but he didn't. He kept knocking on the door and trying to convince me to come out. Then I did the only thing I could do. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could until my voice gave out. After what felt like hours, it was probably only a few minutes, I heard the sound of a police car approaching. Jim must have heard it too, because he immediately ran away. He must have thought I had my phone with me, but in reality, I had left it out in the living room. I heard the fading sounds of footsteps, and then I heard a door slam. I cautiously came out of the bathroom and opened the door to talk to the police. They came into the house and searched the entire place. There was nobody there, which was unsurprising to me. Then they told me that a neighbor had heard me screaming and called them. I never found out who it was, but I really wanted to thank them for the help. I was so grateful that the police had come, but I was also angry with my brother. He knew that guy was bad news, but he still left me alone anyway. I couldn't believe that he had put me in danger like that. I figured Jim was in the park when my brother was with his friends, and when he heard that I was home alone, he must have snuck away and did what he did. When my parents came back, they were shocked to hear what happened. They were furious with my brother and made sure he knew how serious the situation was. They also made sure to take extra precautions to make sure our home was secure and safe. After that, I never trusted my brother's judgment again. I knew he could be reckless and that he didn't always think things through. The really frustrating thing, though, is that Jim played the whole thing off like he was invited to the house. He was a friend of my brother's, so he said that he was invited and he was just waiting. It was my word against his, and he never faced any legal consequences for what he did. My parents did ban him from our house, though. This was over 10 years ago, and of course, I did eventually forgive my brother. He was genuinely remorseful, and technically no harm was done, although it was really close. I'm Crystal, and this happened when I was in the 9th grade. I got home from school at around 3:30 in the afternoon, and I knew it would be at least an hour before my parents got home from work. I usually spent that hour watching TV or doing some homework, but on this day, something was different. As soon as I walked in the door, I felt like somebody was in the house. It was just a feeling at first. I could sense a presence. Then I started to hear noises coming from upstairs. At first, I thought it might just be the sound of wind blowing through the windows, or the creaking of old wooden floorboards. But as I listened more closely, I heard footsteps. Someone was walking around upstairs. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Someone was in the house. Maybe they were trying to steal something. Maybe worse. I tiptoed to the bottom of the stairs and peered up. I saw the figure of a man standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. His face was hidden in the shadows, but I could tell that he was tall and muscular. He was wearing a black hoodie, jeans, and light brown work boots. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was trapped. There was no way out, even though the front door was right there. I tried to back away, but my legs were shaking, so I stumbled. The man started to come down the stairs, and I knew I had to get out of there. Miraculously, my legs sprung into action. I turned and ran as fast as I could, darting out the back door. I sprinted across the lawn to my neighbor's house. My neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, was a kind old lady who had lived next door to me for as long as I could remember. I pounded on her front door, and she opened it. Her eyes were wide with surprise. I fumbled out the story to her. She immediately took me in. We sat in her living room, and she gave me a glass of water. As I sat there, trying to calm down, I heard the sound of a car pulling up and then speeding away from my house. I figured the man had left, but would he come back? I didn't know, but I was scared. Mrs. Wilson comforted me, telling me that everything was going to be all right. She called the police, and they arrived a few minutes later. They searched the house, but there was no sign of the man. He was definitely gone. We later found out that some of my mom's jewelry was stolen, and some other stuff too. All in all, It was less than $1,000 worth, so maybe I saved us a bit by scaring the guy away. Unfortunately, the man was never caught. For weeks after the incident, I was scared to go back into my house, worried that he might come back. I slept with the lights on and was constantly looking over my shoulder. Eventually, the fear subsided and I was able to move on, but I never forgot that day. I was always wondering what might have happened if I didn't run out of the house when I did. It was a close call, and I was glad I got out of there.